welcome. I'm Jackie Stennett, a U.S. Army veteran and the Vice President of Academy Women. Thank you all for taking time out of your busy schedules to join us for today's event. We have participants registered today who represent every branch of military service and every duty status from across the United States and around the globe, as far as Japan and the United Kingdom. For 2022, Academy Women's Career Coaching Workshop, which is held as an annual event, will continue to extend its reach by bringing you a monthly webinar series. As with our in-person career workshop event, the 2022 virtual webinar series will provide insights from subject matter experts and thought leaders who share their knowledge on a broad array of topics designed to support the professional and personal development of military leaders. Today, we are pleased to welcome our presenting partner, Travelers, one of Academy Women's longest held partnerships. Travelers first partnered with Academy Women in 2008, over 15 years ago, and has stood with us through the growth of many of our programs, including the webinar series you're participating in today. Thank you, Travelers, for your continued and tremendous support, and for moving beyond public-facing performative measures by demonstrating through your consistent actions that you are a true ally to military women and the military community. A special thanks goes out to Jim McMahon of Travelers, who works diligently behind the scenes to ensure military members are supported as they transition into meaningful careers subsequent to their service. Also thanks to today's guest speakers, Jan Turner and Lynn Simon Thomas, who along with Jim have spent the past several months collaborating with us to deliver today's much needed discussion. In case you missed it, the Travelers team has graciously agreed to give us even more of their time today by allowing us to continue the conversation in group breakout rooms immediately following the webinar. If your schedule allows, plan to remain until the end of the webinar and take part in these discussions where Jan will answer your questions to dive deeper into the mind-body-heart connection and help you learn more about integral coaching. For those who are in or considering a career transition, join Lynn and Jim in their discussion group, where they will help you discover career opportunities available at Travelers and the reasons why Travelers has been named a top military-friendly employer year after year. With a rich history dating back over 165 years, and where today, over 1,000 military veterans and military spouses call Travelers their home. You'll meet the Travelers team shortly, but first, I'd like to introduce Susan Phelan, who will be your host today. Susan is a U.S. Air Force veteran, a graduate of the U.S. Air Force Academy, and is the founder and president of Academy Women. We've got a lot to cover today, so let's get started. Please join me in welcoming Susan to the virtual stage. Enjoy the discussion, everyone. Susan, over to you.
Thank you, Jackie. I'm Susan Phelan. I'm the founder and president of Academy Women. It is my pleasure to welcome you today to our rich discussion on unmasked authenticity. Before we get started, I want to invite you all to be as interactive as possible. Please put in the chat where you're from, and also any questions that pop into your mind throughout the discussion. Also available to you is the Q&A feature on your webinar platform, and we will be checking that for questions and answers at the end of the session. Just so you can't sit too quietly, I'm going to launch a poll and ask all of you to participate and just kind of give us an idea of where you're at today and how you're feeling, so that we can make our discussion even that much more rich. And while you're doing that, I am going to share just a little disclaimer that we want to remind people that as we run our webinars, we just want to make sure you keep this in mind. All right. Good. I'm looking at the poll. And thank you for participating. All right. Good, good, good. I'm going to go ahead and share these results so that everybody can get a sense for where we're at as a cohort. And there we go, share results. Hopefully you can see, and this will feed into the discussion as we advance. Now, without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce to you Jim McMahon. Jim leads the Inclusive Talent Acquisitions team at Travelers. He's been a longtime supporter of Academy Women, and he has more than 25 years of experience in advising veterans as well as individuals who are making career transitions, and is extremely knowledgeable on Travelers. So, Jim, I'm going to pass it to you.
Thank you. Pleasure being here. Jackie mentioned our relationship going back to 2008. It is hard to believe, 15 years. And, that first interaction, at the Women's Memorial with one of your annual symposiums on leadership, absolutely fabulous. But it's our pleasure to support military transition and Academy Women in several ways, including this monthly webinar series. When we first looked at what to present today, we wanted to do something a little different than the standard corporate commercial. Travelers were second largest commercial property and casualty insurer in the world. We've been around for 170 years. We've got 30,000 employees with 1,000 veterans. Honestly, you can find that out by going to travelers.com, careers military. We've got a lot of information there. So in thinking about the planning, I initially reached out to Lynn Simon Thomas, who is a colleague of mine in talent acquisition. And we talked about something unique today. She asked, do you know Jan Turner? Jan's the chair of the Travelers Women's Network. She's the VP of our web and marketing operations. And, similar to the military, large organization, right? You may not know everyone. So at that point, it was like, yeah, I've heard of Jan, don't really know her. Well, let me tell you, I have really quickly become a fan. She brings unmasked authenticity to absolutely every conversation. And I'm really looking forward to today. So as mentioned, following the presentation, Lynn and I will be in one separate breakout. We'll talk about career opportunities very informally, no slides. If you want to hear a little bit more about us, jump into there. If you want to just continue the dialogue, again, stay here. Jan is going to answer some questions and do some interactions. So we're really hoping you enjoy today's dialogue. And at this point, I'm going to ask my two colleagues, Lynn and Jan, to take over, introduce themselves, and start the conversation. Thanks for joining us, folks.
Hey, Lynn, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, I had something there saying I couldn't start my video because I stopped it. So I'm not sure what happened there, but I can. Thank you. Thank you so much, Jim, and welcome, Jan. I know that you have a lot to share with the group that would help them in their own careers as well as lives. I've personally heard your story, and I must say it's very, very powerful. So I'm excited to have others hear your journey. Where would you like to start?
Yeah, well, thank you, Lynn and Jim, and all of our friends from Academy Women. Thank you for the very kind introduction and for having us here today. So first off, it's a true pleasure to be here with all of you. As a fellow citizen and leader, I'm just grateful for your service, for your contributions to our nation, and I honor each of your unique journeys. So I'd like to begin my story today at what, frankly, could have been the end of it. So one afternoon over a decade ago, I became ill with flu-like symptoms, and I expressed concern to my husband that I thought something serious was coming on, and I went to go lie down. So I headed for bed, focus on just getting under the covers and asleep as quickly as possible, given the onset of severe chills, muscle aches, headache. And when my husband came to bed later that night, he had no idea what was happening in my body. My fever was soaring. I had soaked the sheets with sweat. I was barely able to move. And in the morning, he left me sleeping and went to work in his home office, which was literally just on the other side of the house. And when I came to that morning, I realized that something was incredibly wrong. My vision was fuzzy. I could barely move, but for the shaking from the chills that racked my body. So I ticked through the severity of my symptoms. And while it didn't seem possible, I realized I could have contracted what was known as toxic shock syndrome, or TSS.
Wow, I have heard of that in the past, though. I think in the 80s. I haven't heard of it, anytime lately.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you may recall TSS as, quote, that rare but often fatal disease that's referenced on the warning labels of tampon boxes, right? Which was totally a thing in the 70s and then the 80s. And I had recalled having randomly come across a list of the symptoms of TSS about 2 weeks prior to this illness. And my head was like connecting the dots, and I was like, oh my gosh, my symptoms lined up perfectly. But simultaneous with this realization, I became determined to get medical treatment, but I was absolutely terrified that nobody would believe me. And I say this because while I did, in fact, have my period at the time, there was nothing unusual about my hygiene practices, which was a very well-known cause of TSS, right? It was really the main cause of it. So I found enough energy to reach the phone on the shelf next to my bed. I called my husband's cell phone and I expressed concern, and I asked him to bring me to the doctor as soon as he could. And my doctor, when I got there, was skeptical of my theory. She said she didn't think it seemed possible. She questioned me as she took my temperature. My fever was spiking. She noted the characteristic red rash as it spread out across my torso. She called the emergency room to foreshadow my arrival, and then she went and hopped in her car and followed us there. So as I got into our car, I could see my field of vision narrowing as though I were looking down a tunnel, and delirium was starting to set in. And the emergency room staff were similarly skeptical. My doctors were conferring, and upon our collective insistence, including my husband's, I was tested for TSS. So meanwhile, my blood pressure was, dangerously low. My fever was spiking further and I could barely speak. And I was brought to the intensive care unit, and I was given intravenous antibiotics just in case it actually, came back that this was what I had. So sure enough, the test result, which took a while to come back, eventually came back positive. And what's really interesting is TSS has the mortality rate of Ebola, and it's a death sentence for many people. And many others who do contract it suffer serious consequences and lifelong complications. So given all of this, given the nature of this particular disease, I got off like super easy. I was hospitalized for 4 days. I had a cocktail of antibiotics, pumped into my body intravenously 24/7 for the next 2 weeks. And thankfully, I had a full recovery. I was 38 years old at the time, and I had a husband and a 2-year-old daughter, and I was not ready to leave them.
Wow, I can't even imagine, but good for you. Good for you for being persistent. And I think that's what we all have to do. So can you share with us what did you take away from this experience?
Yeah, I appreciate that question, Lynn. So this experience was a reckoning, and it prompted key questions for me. First, why did this happen? Second, what made me review a list of symptoms for something as random as TSS when I came across them a couple weeks prior? Where did the voice come from that enabled me to self-diagnose so quickly? And how could I avoid this from happening again?
Yeah. How have you gone about, exploring answers to all of these questions?
It was a situation brought on by the place that I had been at for months in my head. And this place is called Burnout. And I committed to myself that I would never, ever visit this place again when I was going through this situation. Because if I had learned any lessons, right, if I was paying any attention at all, there's no way that I could end up, in this sort of situation again. So my burnout at the time was brought on by having my identity and my sense of self-worth tightly connected to what I consider to be my achievements in life. And as an adult, this revolved heavily around my career and around what I perceived as its progression. So over the course of my career, these dynamics coupled with working in, heavily male dominated environments in financial services and insurance led me to put on what I call veneers, to the point where until, a few years ago, I had two ways of showing up in the world, right? There was the formal, serious, stiffer kind of work Jan, and then there was the irreverent, loving, fun, rest of life Jan, and never the two should meet. And the reality was I was not living as my authentic self, and it was exhausting.
Oh, wow. I think, I've experienced something similar to that. How did you find yourself in this challenging situation?
At the time, the business that I was in, I was on the executive team, and we had just been acquired by a competitor.
Mm.
I was among the 40% of the management team members who were invited to stay on with the new management team, which was a wonderful opportunity. But as I moved over, I really genuinely felt like an outsider. And it was tough, even though I wasn't alone in feeling this way. I fought against the stress each day. I took it home with me each night. And I was filled with, as I look back, what I would call kind of an increasing sense of self-righteousness meets playing the victim.
Hmm. What options did you have? And what actions did you take?
I told myself at the time that there was no way that I would quit my job. I'm not a quitter. I wasn't raised that way. I never thought of myself in that way, right? It was the antithesis, of how I approached, challenge and kind of navigating career and all of that. That was true until I became so unhappy that I pulled my contractual parachute that I had by virtue of being on the management team and the situation, with the acquisition. And allow me to say that I was very privileged, right, to have this option in the first place, because most people, if they were in a similar situation, would just have to walk away, full stop, if they decided to quit. So at first, this act of taking back control enabled me to cheerfully approach my job search, my potential next steps. I got really excited about how my career might evolve, and I networked and got back in touch with so many terrific people from my past. And this felt motivating and productive until I quickly realized how being, quote, in transition between jobs did not mesh with how I was wired. So that feeling of striving, of working toward achieving meaningful things as a professional was absent. It was elusive. And I felt increasingly untethered. And what happened is my burnout deepened and was likely tinged with undiagnosed depression. And unchecked, these underlying conditions, I believe, weakened my immune system so severely, made my body, more susceptible to contracting something like TSS. And ironically, I fell ill after I had already accepted a new job that I wasn't sure was the right one for me. I hadn't actually started it yet. And my inner voice was speaking to me, but I still wasn't listening. And it was a really perverse, wake-up call for me. And I believe the voice that diagnosed what was happening to me was honestly my intuition struggling and quite frankly demanding to be heard and to be heeded.
Wow. Where did you go from this place of burnout?
So after my recovery, all was well and good for a few years. I focused on moving and getting resettled with my family, advancing my corporate career, raising our beautiful daughter, having our little son. So my second entanglement with burnout snuck up on me several years later in the insidious way that it can. And it was like sort of a, seductive twilight into darkness over the course of a few months, led by this like incessant siren song of personality, which for most of us is attached at the hip to its host's ego.
Mm.
So, or rather, it's like a partner with whom you've realized it's not healthy for you to be with, but because it's all you feel you know, and you still see the good in and love that person, right? You can't seem to leave. So in this case, my challenges and revisited burnout were brought on by my reaction at the time to some different dynamics. It was around office politics. It was around my unmet longing to do something new and different in my career at that point. And the achiever in me had to keep achieving. The frustrations my team and I were experiencing at the time were rubbing up against my own impatience. And continuing my track record of self-defined, success felt at real risk to me at the time. And internal alarms were just going off in my head.
Wow. I can't even, I love when you said the eagle is sneaky. I'm taking that away. The eagle is sneaky. But now that you've been to the dark place of burnout twice, what have you learned? How can you now detect it when it's happening?
Burnout is very difficult to self-diagnose, particularly for high achievers who are accustomed to and thrive under stress in high-pressured environments. We keep our eyes, somehow averted from the train that is heading straight toward us. And in my case, instead of moving out of harm's way, I continued to add to my task list. I continued to navigate the next power play at work. I was moving through my perceived obligations day and night. I would worry about the future. And on occasion, I would fret about the past. And when I look back, I realized how very rarely I lived in the present. And there were other, manifestations of this too, that evidenced the toll that stress was taking on me physically and emotionally. I experienced chronically tight and knotted muscles. I had like a lack of regular exercise in my life because who the heck had time for that? I had a gut that could turn against me if the often present, butterflies in my stomach that I woke up with each day and just would often have would get the best of me on a given day or in a given situation. And there was also a way that I could be especially short with my spouse. And of course I had, fitful sleep. I just wasn't even sleeping well.
Wow. What are some of the, other subtle or not so subtle signs of burnout that you can share with us?
So burnout is not a medical diagnosis. The Mayo Clinic, which is just one source that's out there, defines burnout as a special type of work-related stress. And it's a state of physical or emotional exhaustion that also involves a sense of reduced accomplishment and loss of personal identity. So researchers indicate that individual factors, right, such as personality traits, family life, influence who experiences job burnout. Depression can be a factor as well for some people. So whatever the cause, job burnout can affect your physical health, your mental health. Symptoms can show up in obvious ways and in more pernicious ways. So the Mayo Clinic cites various questions that one can consider in terms of, have you become cynical or critical at work? Have you become irritable or impatient with the various folks you interact with, whether it's customers, clients, coworkers, family members? Do you lack the energy to be consistently productive? Do you find it hard to concentrate or even just get started on a task? And do you lack, that sense of satisfaction when you do have your wins, right? You have your achievements. So emotional consequences will usually be accompanied by physical changes in the body, which over time can lead to serious health issues for some people. So, helpguide.org is another resource that talks about the following physical symptoms of burnout. Feeling tired and drained most of the time, experiencing frequent headaches, muscle pain, having changes in appetite or sleep habits, and ultimately lowered immunity and frequent illness or serious illness.
How did you manage to overcome burnout and turn the situation around for yourself?
So this second time around, it was really about rising up from the ashes of burnout through forays into self-development. And some of this was serendipitous at the time, and some of this I was starting to explore. So I attended at the behest of my closest friend a workshop at a yoga and a wellness center that she wanted to go to. And that workshop challenged me to see my role in how I looked at my day-to-day reality and how that influenced my mindset and my behavior. It was very, very powerful for me. I also read a book at the time on how to unbleep yourself. Yes, that's the title. And yes, I read it. I was also focusing on identifying the inner voice of and increasingly getting better at slaying my own inner critic. So among these little breakthrough moments and experiences that I was having, I had the opportunity through my employer to work with an executive coach over a period of several months. And it was genuinely transformational for me. And yes, that was a privilege too.
Well, perhaps we can talk more about the importance of having a supportive employer if you have time later in a discussion. But it certainly sounds like you had an employer who was willing to equip you with the tools that you needed to be yourself. At this stage, was that employer Travelers?
Yes, it was Travelers.
Okay, thanks for clarifying that. You are fortunate indeed. So how has this executive coaching, transformed you?
Yeah, I mean, to start, the coaching experience that I went through involved a mind, body, heart approach that was deep, emotional, impactful, and ultimately for me, perspective and behavior changing. And the effects of that experience carry over even to this day. And these and other experiences and resources that I was tapping into at the time led me to truly wake up to this incredible life that I'm in now and start living with what I refer to affectionately as true agency.
True agency. What is true agency? Prior to this webinar, I personally have never heard of it.
Yeah, so agency is that sense of control that you feel in life, your capacity to influence your own thoughts, your own behavior, have faith in your ability to handle a wide array of tasks, challenges, situations. Your sense of agency helps you to be psychologically stable, yet flexible in the face of conflict or change, which, let's face it, is inevitable in life, right? Personally, professionally. So as my layers of veneer that I referred to earlier started peeling away, increasingly I could feel and see the freshness that was underneath it all. And the freshness was me. And others were increasingly seeing it too. And identifying it to me in different ways in terms of how I was showing up and how I was making them feel. And I was feeling lighter and able to be more resilient in the face of inevitable challenge and frustration. So what had been two seemingly diametrically opposed Jans were increasingly becoming one who was in touch with her values and voice as she was stepping into her power. And over time, I've made time, for a steady stream of nourishment, right? Through intentionally cultivated habits to really accelerate this integration and take ownership of it. And this includes, mindfulness practice. It includes regular exercise. It includes healthy eating. It takes time. It includes taking time for creative pursuits, which in my case involve art, involve music, involve just playing, with my kids, with my family, and seeking out points of view through many different means that expand my thinking and influence how I continue to show up in life. So these experiences, collectively also convinced me to build upon these epiphanies and these shifts in how I was responding to life, as well as on my passion for leading and developing others, which I've really had throughout my career.
Yeah, wow. So through coaching, you discovered how to become more in tune to your values and your voice by, as you stated earlier, really developing habits around mindfulness, exercise, healthy eating, and getting in touch with your creative side. So how have these actions been insightful now?
Yeah, for me, Lynn, these experiences showed me that I wanted to become a coach and support others at some point in my career. So they showed me that pretty early on. And several years later, I'm now making that purposeful, investment, right? Which is a bit of an expansion and a pivot for me professionally by expanding upon my day job into the field of integral coaching. So integral coaching is a method that attends to a person's whole life, helping them to achieve not just goals, but to develop competencies so that they can be self-generating in their own development. So common topics for which people seek coaching are work issues, health issues, relationship challenges, wanting to start or stop a habit, or just being in a transition of any kind. So for example, a person may come to coaching because of a challenge that they're experiencing in one area of life. Let's just say work, right? Which is common. And the coach looks for what might be underlying the particular challenge, where else it might be showing up in that person's life, and works with the person not only to understand the deeper issue, but also to help the person develop greater skill to meet challenges in all domains of life. So ultimately, a coaching relationship that begins around work may result in improvements in relationships and health and in other areas. So doing this type of work is also important to me as part of my just really heartfelt commitment and paying it forward to others. Instead of hyper focusing on achievement, as I did before, I'm more intent on being of service to others and seeking to leave a lasting legacy. And this is just one way of doing that.
Wow. How else are you, exploring the implication of what you've uncovered during the coaching and what you're experiencing now?
So the story that I'm sharing with all of you today is mine, but it's not particularly unique, and it's not really particularly special. It is, as psychology and Eastern Western spiritual traditions have shown, the phenomena that I've described, manifest in various but largely unpredictable ways for many, many, many of us. And they're anchored in what is the human condition. So at the heart of this is the reality that our personalities develop in service of our ego. And the ego's main role is to protect us from perceived risks, right? Perceived dangers that are rooted largely in our childhood experiences. So it has a very benevolent, intention, but left unchecked, our ego, which is really cloaked in those nuances of personality, it's more than happy to run the show. It's more than happy to call the shots in our lives. It's kind of like, a master ventriloquist. And it's been around a long time. And oh my gosh, like its voice sounds like our own when we hear it in our heads. We can't even at times distinguish the two. So most of us do tend to live in our heads, right? Live inside our heads. In addition to being, preoccupied by nonstop thoughts, we often fixate on worries, standards, expectations. And in reality, many of the standards and expectations that we constantly are holding ourselves to are not even our own. Rather, they're based in others' judgments that over the years we've tacitly accepted or have subconsciously taken on as our own, since they feel like what we should do in our lives. So this is particularly important since, each of us as humans, right, are wired to default to being guided by our minds. So as I've been highlighting, this truly can work for us or it can work against us.
Yeah, I again, the ego comes up again, and we do tend to kind of listen to it, right? Knowing it's our voice, so we feel that's real. Tell me more about this insight regarding how our personalities are wired.
Well, the good news is we are not our personalities. So even if you love your personality full stop, it's really not your true nature. So with that said, if we don't connect the creativity and the power of our amazing minds to the wisdom of our body and the love that's within our hearts, we can't live from a place of wholeness. We can't connect with our true self. And you might ask, well, why? Why is that? So living fully requires alignment of what is not just one center of intelligence, the mind, but actually the three that are in each of us. It's the mind, it's the body, it's the heart. And what enables this alignment of mind, body, heart is a few things. And I think one way to think about it is in what's, kind of summarized here. So first, it's about getting curious about understanding how you as a unique individual are wired. So this includes, a couple of key things. It includes the mindsets and behaviors that hold you back. So a great example of this is actually overused strengths that have become liabilities for yourself under stress. And this is a very different way of, kind of thinking about some of the root causes. You don't necessarily go to strengths as a potential area of research or clues. And for me, this is where my desire to achieve could go into overdrive and sabotage me, as in the case of the story that I've shared with you today about the illness that I literally invited into my body and life over a decade ago. So the other component here is about how you can how you can better harness, I should say, your gifts, your strengths for the benefit of yourself and for the benefit of others. So these are just a couple areas to explore in this concept of understanding how you're wired. And the second component is owning it, right? It's taking responsibility for how you choose to live and being intentional about where you ultimately put your focus and spend your time is a critical third element here. So like a plant that needs water, right, thrives with the right type of plant food. This process requires awareness, it requires attention, and a willingness to cultivate self-acceptance, which can be a challenge for many of us, given how we've been raised or what we've experienced and internalized, and also a willingness to cultivate vulnerability.
Yeah, it's so interesting, Jan, because you spoke earlier about the child within us. And I think a lot of what we carry as adult is from, our childhood. So thank you, for sharing this guidance. It makes a lot of sense to me, but perhaps it's really easier said than done. What advice do you have for those who want to make, their own change, their own self-development?
So simply
Or a priority, yeah.
Yeah, I would say, Lynn, simply put, self-development is a learning and a growth journey that's well worth investing in over time. But it's a personal choice that you literally have to make and choose to make. So as you experience momentum and feel the benefits that you get from investing in your own self-development, it does become very self-perpetuating. You just need to start. And if you're already on your way, I encourage you to recommit to that journey and let things unfold for you over time. So you can do this by continuing to do a few things. You can strengthen your ability to stay present in the good times and in the bad. And that means not dwelling in the past or in the worries about the future, right? It means developing the ability to tap into more and more over time, your own innate wisdom, your heart, your sense of curiosity, which is such a beautiful catalyst for so many things in life. So don't be afraid to dream and imagine the possibilities. One of the things that I've realized as an adult over the years is that, I fell into the trap of thinking that dreaming was something that children do, right? It's for kids. And then as you get older, it's like the dream tap for me just shut off. I didn't really dream. And I'm not just talking about night dreams. I'm talking about just dreaming, right? Wishing, visualizing, doing those sorts of things. And there's an opportunity to use these ideas and insights to take action by experimenting and learning along the path or the paths that are showing up for you. If you're, intentional about thinking through these things, you don't have to take big leaps. You don't have to take big risks, but you can take those very intentional steps through what really are a series of experiments, right? And you learn and you grow just from taking actions that feel aligned with what can make sense for you. So, as you move along this sort of path, I'll share that I genuinely believe that the struggles and the challenges that we encounter are presented to each of us for a reason. So often they're indicative of something we're meant to explore or experience in order to learn or to grow, and or to just support others in their development or in what they might need to learn or experience. And sometimes the provenance of our struggles and difficulties will never be fully known to us or understood. And I think it's valuable to learn to be comfortable with accepting and really kind of playing in that mystery. And oh gosh, don't expect perfection, because the quest for perfection really is like the antithesis to enabling growth. It's like kryptonite to your inner super being.
Yes, I would have to agree with you. The quest for perfection is so often the enemy of the good. So is there anything else that you would like to share with us about your journey?
I think I'd go back to some things that are at the root of my own childhood, because I've referenced childhood a few times, and I've spent time examining certain things and have an opportunity to continue to be very circumspect there myself. But when I was growing up, my father was the traditional breadwinner in our household. My mom stayed at home with the kids. My dad consistently, sadly diminished her intelligence and the value of her work as a wife, a mother, a homemaker. And this catalyzed in me a passion for equity and inclusion and a desire to just ensure my own independence as I grew up. And perhaps, all of this also fueled my, unbalanced quest to achieve that I referenced, earlier. So this passion for equity, for independence, in turn, I think fuels my desire to help others to understand and address what holds them back from being their best selves. So coaching is one way that I'm acting on this, but other ways include chairing Travelers, Women, and Allies Diversity Network, which has over 6,300 members, holding volunteer leadership positions in community organizations that give back to economically disadvantaged women, children, families, volunteering, for these organizations. So my judge, AKA my inner critic, and my hyper achiever saboteurs are still with me, and they'll always be there to some degree. But now when they come onto the scene in my life, I'm quite good at doing a few things. First of all, recognizing them. Second of all, giving them each a toy. And third, popping them into their playpen, because guess what, kids? Mommy's got real work to do, and I really don't need your help. Thank you very much.
I love that you giving them a toy to play with and popping them into a playpen. I think I'm going to use that as well. Throughout our discussion, you've indicated and you referenced how your work environment, both positively and negatively, can really correlate with your own health, your well-being, and your professional and personal development. Can you share your thoughts about the importance of choosing a psychologically safe work culture where we can all feel that we're supported and we can be ourselves?
Yeah, it's so important, Lynn, to bring it full circle, back to that. So I personally believe the best organizations have leaders and managers who understand that in order for people to do their best work each day, they have to be in a place that nurtures their overall well-being. And this is a key component for organizational health. So such companies will walk the talk from the top of the house to how managers interact with their team members. And their employees will care about, build relationships with, support each other. They know that challenges both in and outside of the workplace, as well as just with the seasons of life that come and go for all of us, are a real thing. And they cultivate, connection. They cultivate inclusivity in the culture. They value diversity, right? And they're moving to, constantly improve in these areas. So I see Travelers as one of those companies. We evidence this in a myriad of ways. It's embodied in what we call the Traveler's Promise, which, simply states our commitment to taking care of our customers, our communities, and each other. And it shows up in the way that we're known for a few things, for being down to earth and collegial in our culture, where executives are genuine and approachable. It's been tested in very tough times too, such as following George Floyd's murder or the surge of hate crimes against Asian and Pacific Islanders, where the company intentionally opened up many channels for listening, for engagement, and just for mutual support of employees at all levels. And those are, just a couple of examples that are, somewhat more top of mind. But before organizations can help address things like burnout, right? Support employees in this dynamic that I've been talking about around inauthenticity, and just, support overall well-being of their teams, they need to create the necessary conditions to just be able to discuss these things, right? Mm-hmm. So too often, burnout carries a stigma of individual weakness, right? That somebody can't hack it, which makes people reluctant to speak up about situations like what I'm talking about today. And, leaders must provide psychological safety, or a culture where people can feel secure enough to take risks, share problems without fear of punishment, or any sort of retribution. So according to a recent Harvard Business Review article talking about burnout is still taboo at work, this came out in October. One of the most telling signs that the US is experiencing a burnout crisis may be the fact that Google searches for, quote, burnout symptoms hit an all-time high this past May. So, as we've weathered the third year of the pandemic with the prospect of a faltering economy, I mean, that insight is really powerful.
Yeah, and I must say, I was part of the listening conversations that Travelers had, and it really made me feel very proud to be an employee here at Travelers. So you're absolutely right with that one. Before we open up the dialogue to the full group, do you have any additional guidance for the group as they focus on their own self-development and in a quest to live a more whole, authentic life?
Well, first, I think if sharing my story assists another person on their unique journey, the struggle has been even more worth it at the most, basic level. As a next step to today's session, I invite, each of you who are here with us today to consider just reflecting on a few questions. What does it mean to live your own life with authenticity? What are your top values in life? How well do they align with where you're actually spending your time, actually spending your attention? Do you have overused strengths that become unintended limiters in times of stress? And how do they show up for you? Like, really getting curious about that. And, what mindset, behavior shifts could you experiment with to improve your well-being and help you live and lead with greater intention? And how, what can you do, right, as a manager, as a leader, to create a psychologically safe environment where others can freely express their authentic selves? And of course, these are things that you can do also if, as an individual contributor as well. I think it's important to call that out. So with that, I welcome any initial questions or observations that are coming up for the audience. And I'm really just so privileged to have a chance to be with you and to have this conversation with you.
Thank you. Jana, as I said at the top of the hour, I've heard your story, but each time I hear it, it really, touches me and really make me laser focus on my life and, how I'm going about each day. So I thank you for that. And at this time, I'm going to toss it over to Susan so she can guide us through any questions and answers that we may have.
Thank you. And thank you so much for sharing your story. It was so powerful. I'd like to invite all folks to go into your chat as well as your Q&A and put any questions in there that come to mind. And meanwhile, I am going to launch another poll. Let's see here and see how it worked. Let's see here. Okay. So go ahead and tell us your thoughts. And as you're doing that, I am going to pull the questions that have come in. So Jan, tell us, if you, going back in time to your 25-year-old self, what would be the most important thing you would have done differently as you launched your career and made decisions that were important to your own personal success as a professional?
Yeah, I think if I had to boil it down to one thing, there's this concept it's like so basic of just not taking yourself or things too seriously at its most basic level, right? So I put that out there because when I talk about living in your heads, right, and just being influenced at times by the voice of the judge, which can be pretty strong for some people, and just really hard to distinguish from the voice of self. There is this notion of really just looking at life as more of a journey, more of an opportunity for learning, more of an opportunity for exploration and play, right? And that is something where if I could have internalized that as a 25-year-old, I think it would have been incredibly powerful and impactful.
Thank you. Lily Bowen asked a question, actually for you to share an example of how you deflect the saboteurs with a toy or putting them into the playroom, as you said.
That's a great question. Yeah. So it's interesting. There's a few strategies that I've used, and I'll share a couple that are they're different from each other. So there is the ability to literally recognize the voice of the judge, or like a saboteur type characteristic that somebody might have. It could be hyperachievement in the case of what I've described to the group. It could be a sense of hyper vigilance, or a controlling kind of sense. It could be playing the victim, right? So there are various ways that these sorts of dynamics can show up repeatedly in people's lives. And one way to shut down those voices is to acknowledge them and basically just say, get the hell out of here. Like, thanks, or to the effect of, thanks very much, I appreciate your advice, but I got this, right? Because these voices are basically treating you as if you were the helpless, 3-4-year-old child that needs to be coddled, cared for, advised. And the advice is just, erroneous and outdated and all of that, right? So you can react with humor, you can react with, decisive, direct, anger that just kind of shuts it down. Another thing that you can do is interrupt the thought pattern by activating something with the body. So a great strategy is to, there's two of them that come to mind. One of them is actually to take your fingers, right? Take your thumb and your forefinger and rub them together with such care and focus and attention that you can feel the fingertip ridges on each of the finger. And you only need to do this for 10 or 15 seconds to just start to calm the body, bring the blood pressure down, and break almost like that ruminating thought cycle that can happen. Another thing would be to look at something in your immediate surroundings and just study it and look at it in a way that you've never looked at it before. The colors, the textures, the shapes, the way the light and shadow are playing on it. And do this for just 10 or 15 seconds as a pattern interrupt strategy.
Oh, that's really helpful. On that note, I am going to ask everybody to hold their questions and give you an opportunity to join a second discussion group or continue the discussion here. We are going to really give on the first, this, if you stay in the room, you're going to have an opportunity to continue to connect with Jan. And if you move to the second discussion, you'll have an opportunity to talk more about your own personal career development and opportunities at Travelers. So with that, I'd like to thank Travelers for your incredible presentation. Jan, you were incredibly vulnerable and authentic and just such a wonderful role model. And Lynn, thank you so much for facilitating and asking such great questions. Coming up next, just so you have it on your calendars, on the 15th of December, we have our December webinar on diverse careers in the healthcare industry. So we hope that you'll be able to join us then. You can learn more at our website, militaryals.org webinar series. And we have already programming into 2023 with our career coaching workshop on the 13th of April and our Officer Women Leadership Symposium on the 14th of April. So we hope you'll be able to join us on the 16th of February, right after our New Year's celebration. We'll have an event with Deloitte. You're always welcome to add your information to the professional profile directory, which we make available to partners and organizations interested in connecting with folks like you. And then we have all kinds of resources for career transition, career development, personal development at our website, academywomen.org and militaryals.org. All right, with that being said, I have a scan code here that you can use to join the other discussion with Jim and Lynn, or you can choose to stay here. I am going to put some links into the chat, and if that's easier for you. So hopefully that works. And if you would like to move, now is the time. If you would like to stay, then I'm going to continue here with Jan. So go ahead and make that transition. And thank you for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you again soon. All right, for those who are staying, we have such a wonderful opportunity here to continue the discussion and talk through additional ideas of what that may be on your mind, or a personal experience that you may have had that you would like to share. So would anybody like to either put in the chat or in the Q&A thoughts that you have or reactions that you have to what we talked about? I think it's tricky because most of us aren't used to being as vulnerable as Jan has been, so it makes it especially challenging to sometimes even ask a question on the topic. So one question that has come in is, Jan, talk about how you work with your family to strengthen some of these tenets and skill sets that you have learned yourself. How do you get support from them? And then how do you engage your coworkers in that learning process as well?
Yeah, I love that question. Thank you so much for asking it. So my husband, had the, I don't know if I want to call it pleasure or privilege of being on the ride with me, over the course of our 14 years of marriage. And there have been a lot of highs, right? And a lot of beautiful, beautiful times and beautiful moments, but there have been some low valleys, right? And some dark times similar to what I've shared. And I think when I reflect back, my ability to just process things, learn things, and communicate with him and be able to share things has been incredibly valuable. Even if he just listens or doesn't know what to say, over the years has been super valuable. I would say that over the last several years, as I've gotten much more intentional and focused, and at times, just a bit more disciplined, but also just being mindful of the things that happen that are a little bit more, synchronicity oriented in my life and leaning into them. I've communicated with him about what I'm doing or why I'm investing in certain things from a self-development perspective and why I think it can support me and in turn make me stronger and better, right? For the family, right? As a wife, as a mom, and it hasn't been a hard sell with him. He's been, super supportive, and I'm very fortunate for that. And then I think at work, one of the things that I really value is inclusivity and inclusive leadership. And part of the way that I do that is to very much meet people where they are. So part of what I shared with the group was around recognizing that people may encounter challenges and difficulties in their life due to any number of issues, right? It could be a divorce, it could be a death in the family, it could be an illness, dot, dot, dot. And I think it's incredibly important to support people in a way that, just recognizes this journey that we're all on, which is a very human one called life. And when those issues happen, we stop, drop, and are there for each other, And I think those are things that create connection, build relationships, create a degree of loyalty, and they're also a way of translating and acting on the culture, right, of the organization and its values. So those are some of the things that I would say in response to that question.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another comment that came in was how much the group appreciated hearing the reminder to not take things personally. And in some ways, it's easier said than done. What are some techniques that you use to really stay true to that idea that even though in theory, we all believe it's good not to take things personally. Sure. How do you do it?
Yeah, it is a totally fair question. And I'll come at this from a couple different angles. The first one that comes to mind is the personality, right, that we each have, and in the ego, right, that's cloaked in that personality can show up in different ways. But for a lot of folks, there can be defensive triggers that happen, right? You can react defensively. You may just feel it in your body. You may see it in terms of how it shows up in your face and your throat if you get flushed, right? You may feel your breathing get shallow. You may feel your heart race if you get defensive. You may lash out at people. But like defensiveness is always kind of a clue for, what is it that's triggering me this way? Why am I reacting this way? Is there a different way to look at this challenge or situation? I genuinely believe that the challenges and the issues and the obstacles that we come across in life are there for a reason. And that one way to challenge yourself on this is to say, what could be the gift of this situation? What could be the gift? And you may not have answers, okay? If you're at a point where you're just not ready to activate or think that way, but just being able to come back and ask that question of yourself when you're facing those challenges and obstacles, and getting more curious about exploring it, and even just writing down what comes to mind, even if you're not ready to think about it more deeply or accept it, is one particular strategy. Another strategy is to recognize that oftentimes we might be making assumptions in a situation, right, that is causing us to have stress or frustration and take stuff pretty seriously. So there is this notion of curiosity as like this amazing superpower that adult professionals don't really think about curiosity as an amazing superpower, but the ability to just ask questions of somebody who you're, getting into a conflict with, or, even a large group, right, where you're in a situation where there's a big presentation going on, just to ask questions and get curious. And for a minute, say to yourself, gee, I might not have all the facts here. I might be looking at it in a way that maybe isn't 100% accurate, and it's making me feel this way. I'm going to get curious and lean in instead of leaning away or blowing up. Right? Those would be a couple of things.
Oh, that's great. On a similar note, how do you track progress towards the goals that you're setting for yourself around your mindset, your body, your heart? How do you measure and track that progress?
Yeah, another really fantastic question. Very specific to each person's journey, so I'll address it, from my own vantage point. There are many many ways that I've tracked it over the years. So one really critical one that's like super fundamental is the quality of my sleep. My ability to put my head on the pillow at night and not be ruminating about my day or fretting and worrying about the stuff that's on my plate tomorrow or a meeting that may or may not go well. Being able to transition from, what often are very busy days to just this period of respite, and really just treating it as like the ability to shut off and transition and move into this place of peace, which is sleep. And so you can judge it by how fast can you get to sleep, how smoothly can you get to sleep, the quality of that sleep. And when you wake up in the morning, I'll share a quick personal story that I think the group might find interesting. I mentioned a workshop that I went to years ago that a friend had said, like, hey, I'm going to go to this workshop. Like, do you want to go with me? And I read it and I was like, boy, that sounds really interesting. It sounds like something I might be able to use. And it ended up being very transformational for me. So I'm not just going to use that word. I'm going to provide a piece of one way I knew it was transformational was when I came back from this workshop, and a lot of what this workshop talked about was how, basically our thoughts and our ability to not live in the present can just spin us up and send us down a spiral that may not even be remotely connected to reality, and just distances us from our power and our ability to have true agency, which I had defined in this discussion. And when I came back from this workshop and was really just reflecting on all these amazing insights and had been internalizing them throughout the 3 days, I went to bed. When I got home, I woke up the next morning and I had to go to work. It was a Monday. And when I woke up, I noticed that something wasn't there anymore. And by the way, it's never returned. And it was the anxious butterflies in my stomach that I would wake up feeling as soon as my alarm went off, and I would go to reach over and shut my alarm off to be able to go to work. And the reality is I never knew they were there. It was only when they weren't there anymore that all of a sudden I was like, oh my gosh, what am I doing to myself in my head? This, triggering, adrenaline, cortisol, all these things that at the end of the day are just stressing and taxing my body and potentially shortening my life, So I would just throw that out there.
I love that. So now that you are a coach, what are you going to do to seek coaching for yourself in an ongoing way or ongoing mentoring? How do you work with, seek, and optimize opportunities to still gain wisdom and insights and perspective?
Yes. Oh my gosh, that is so amazing. So I'll share a couple observations with you about my own self-development journey, because I just got certified recently, and what I really internalized with that process was it literally is like now time zero. It's kind of like it's a new beginning. It's not an ending. Having gone through a year of all this intensive training. And some of the things that I'm doing, as a coach, but just as a person, I'm continuing to seek, how do I say this, insight and guidance around things that are specific to things that are unique to my personality and areas in how I show up in life where I know I still have opportunities to get underneath them. And I'm going to come back to a resource in a minute that I want to share with the group that could be an interesting thing for folks to kind of play with if some of the stuff that I've said has piqued their interest. I'll come back to that in a moment. But so I'm continuing to kind of like just do work around how my personality shows up, where it has the thorniest, roughest, difficult edges, and basically seeking coaching and guidance in those areas in a way that, I've just learned is incredibly valuable, because it's hard for me to really reckon with those things fully on my own. I also, as a coach, am going to seek feedback on occasional videos when I coach clients to get advice from expert coaches on how I'm showing up for clients, the guidance that I'm giving them, and the way that I'm supporting them in their development. But then on a personal note, I have an opportunity to deepen my meditation practice. So I had a much deeper meditation practice several months ago that in more recent months, I've kind of fallen off the wagon a bit on for various reasons. And I'm so eager to get back into that because I mentioned several forms of nourishment and sustenance. For me, one of the things that has given me the most sense of groundedness, a sense of ease, a sense of overall peace, clarity, and the ability to be a better active listener has been a regular meditation practice. So that's just from my vantage point. But I have actually felt those qualities deteriorate a bit in more recent months when I've become that much more busy and did not put as much time in that area. I exercise regularly, but I want to be able to move from, for example, I work out twice a week. I want to be able to work out 3 times a week. I now feel like I can integrate that into my schedule, right? Consciously, intentionally feel the benefits from it immediately. And then I have, oh my gosh, I have the most incredible bookshelf. So one of the things that was like this crazy little gift of going through this process of all this training was they send you like 14 books that you read over the course of the year. And it's, to me, it's just like so many rich insights that are so fundamental from, spiritual traditions to ways to cultivate resilience to the power of the body and the nature of like somatic intelligence as opposed to just mental intelligence. So I have just so many things to continue to dive into and read. And I'm happy to share a couple of recommendations to folks on books if this is something that folks are curious about. But let me come back to that resource that I mentioned. So when a lot of what I've talked about has been anchored in this phenomenon of personality. And personality is something that all of us have. Nobody's immune to it. And there are elements of our personality that are wonderful strengths and assets and can, if anything, just be dialed up to serve us even more intentionally in our lives. And there is a tool that's available online for a very low cost. I want to say it's maybe $12 to get one of these online reports. But the institute is called the Enneagram Institute. So ENNEAGRAM Institute.com. And folks might have heard about the Enneagram. It's become a bit more popular in recent times, but it's a way of looking at personality type that is not just about giving you a type and some insights on the type. That actually helps you understand developmental actions and steps to take based on how your personality shows up and affects you in your life. So for just, spending a few minutes doing their online quiz, not overthinking it, answering honestly, you get a really nice little report that you can glean a lot of nice insight on just from yourself or sharing it with people who know you well. It might be a spouse, it might be a friend, and just, getting curious about what you learn there. And if you work with a coach, you can go much, much deeper into those insights, but that would be something that I would leave the group with.
I love that. I Googled it and put it in the chat. So
yeah, excellent. Thank you.
Take advantage of it. Another thing that came up is something you didn't talk a lot about, but I'm wondering the question is asking how nutrition has factored into your journey, and is that something you pay attention to? If so, can you share best practices?
Yeah, definitely. What I've learned is that, and some of this is personal, some of it's from working with an exercise professional, that if you can work out regularly on your own, or even with a trainer, but if you don't make certain adjustments in how you eat and in what you drink, you can erase a lot of those benefits pretty quickly and just not make progress against whatever goals you set for yourself. So what I learned was dialing up and being more intentional about an exercise program was not as much about frequency as it was about consistency. So when it comes to consistency, I think I mentioned I work out twice a week for an hour each time, and I'm eager to just add an additional hour to that, on my schedule and on my own terms. But what I noted was when I started doing this more regularly a few years ago was I made simple adjustments in my diet to help ensure that I was supporting and able to kind of complement and accelerate the benefits that I was getting from getting stronger and just kind of, building more endurance through cardio and things like that. And to me, I'm not I don't give advice and stuff on diet, but the approach that I take to diet is very simple in that I focus on eating whole foods, right? So avoiding processed foods where you can, avoiding things that have added sugar, avoiding things that are really heavily processed with, white flour, and prioritizing plenty of lean protein, right? In various forms, including if you're vegetarian, making sure you're getting plenty of protein. And then dialing up the vegetables so much more, having some sort of like grain, if you will, or AKA starch, but choosing the ones that really are going to have the lower glycemic index. So basmati rice, for example, as opposed to, a white rice, right? Like multigrain as opposed to, other elements that are just have a higher glycemic load. So it's a lot of common sense, and then just really paying attention to portion control. And when you want to have a treat yourself, and don't make it a big deal. Don't make it too rigid, either. And then when it comes to things like beverage consumption, avoiding things with added sugar. I like to avoid also artificial sweeteners just because, I feel better doing that. And then managing caffeine intake and managing alcohol intake.
Mhm. Thank you. Of course, we're all wondering, and Casey put it in the Q&A, what are the books that you read that inspired you? I know that's a tall order for you to list them all, but if you'd be willing to share, I think.
Yeah, no, and I'm gonna go, there were 3 that came to mind, and I'm gonna take it as a sign that these are the 3 that are coming to mind, for me, for this group right now. So there's at least one or two of you out there who maybe could benefit from them. But there's a book called A Year to Live. And that book is by Stephen, Stephen, Levine, Levine. So that's one book that is, it's a quick read. It's like a weekend read for many people, but it's very insightful and it's very moving. So he is somebody who's like a Zen meditation practitioner, but he has spent many years working with people in hospice. So he has a lot of perspective around what it means to die and quote die well. And he spent a period of time with his partner, really treating kind of a year as if it were their last and seeing what it shaped and shifted for them. So I found that just incredibly profound. It was probably the first book I read when I started my training journey. Another book that folks may or may not have encountered before, but it gets back to one of the questions that you had asked, Susan, is a book called The 4 Agreements. The 4 Agreements, and that's by Don, D-O-N, Miguel, M-I-G-U-E-L, Ruiz, R-U-I-Z. And that is a book of, I think he articulates it as, ancient, kind of Toltec wisdom about how to live a full life. And some of the fundamentals within that book are around not making assumptions, not taking things personally, always doing your best, right? Some really fundamental things, but just delivered in such a beautiful conversational bite-sized way. And then the third book that came to mind to share with the group is by Norman Fisher. And it's called, and one component of the title is called Training in Compassion. And it covers a lot of like fundamental teachings from Buddhism as just a reference point, for a spiritual reference point. And it's really a profound read in terms of insights that can help you just kind of reset your head, reset your perspective, remind yourself to give yourself grace and not take yourself too seriously. I found that read just very inspiring and enriching.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
So one thing that you have talked a lot about is working towards goals. How often do you set new goals and revisit the goals that you set?
Yeah. I would say that I'm at a point right now where it's annual, and I have found, and that's kind of like a macro answer. I think within exercise and diet, there are little tweaks and adjustments that I do within a year. So I like had a sober month this year just because I felt like having one. I was like, hey, I've never done this. So I'm gonna have a month where I just don't drink, and I'm gonna observe the shifts and changes, and found it to be really helpful and really valuable, and a great way to then just naturally curb my intake because I liked the benefits that I saw from just a little experiment. So that's a great example of me, giving myself an experiment almost on a whim, right? Not as something I have to go check off my list and feel like if I don't do this, I'm a failure. But I got curious about it, and then I did the experiment, and it's shifted and changed my habits almost organically, kind of coming out of that. But I worked with a coach last December and set a development plan with him that I've been working on this year, getting, guidance and feedback on this year, sharing reflections on, and I'm at a point where I'm resetting, where I've made progress and making adjustments in my practices that I integrate into my life to give me that nourishment that I talked about earlier, so I can show up, in a effective way as a leader, right, at work, as a coach to my clients, and as a family member to all those in that realm of my life, my friendships, etc. So it's at least annually. I'm a big fan of doing a vision board in January or December, and oh my gosh, it is just the best. I talk about creativity being something that adults don't always spend a lot of time and attention on, but it can be something that lets you tap more into your heart, right? Into a sense of what might be coming up for you, things that can give you clarity by just letting yourself play. And for some people, creativity is a way to get into that state of flow where you just experience ease, and things are effortless and fun, and time just goes by. So I go and I just cut images, out of magazines that speak to me, or I don't even know why they're speaking to me. I search for images on the internet for things that are coming to me that are inspiring to me, or that are anchored around things that are important to me over the next year. I come up with words that are inspiring me, and I basically type them out. I print them out, but I end up creating a very organic collage each year, and then I put it in a place in my home where I'll see it at least twice a day. And I use it as inspiration. And what I've found is over the last 3 or 4 years that I've done this, when I reach the end of the year without, having a scorecard mentality, I'm always blown away by how much of what was on that vision board actually manifested in some way. So those are some of the things I would share.
Love it. All right. So it's inevitable that you're going to have derailments. And when things don't go well, do you have a process for pulling yourself out of potentially a steep downward slope that have worked for you?
Yes. It's a great question. That concept of grace is so important. So one of the things that I mentioned was the willingness to cultivate a sense of vulnerability for yourself as part of your development journey, but also a sense of self-acceptance. So the self-acceptance is really important, because when we talked about this, I said the first thing is to just begin, or begin again. And if you have to begin again 6 times in a year, who cares? Right? If you start certain things and for whatever reason your life takes you off on a path where you're not as able to commit to an exercise routine, or make certain adjustments in your diet, or show up in a certain way at work around an issue that you're working on, etc. Give yourself grace, right? Have the ability to step back and reflect on it, and say, you know, it's okay. I'm not here to beat myself up about this. Is there a learning? Is there an insight? You know, when I fell off this situation or broke this habit, you know, what did I experience? How did it show up for me? Were there things that actually made it such that it was just less pleasant and helpful to have broken that habit, such that the will to cultivate it is going to be a bit stronger next time because you actually felt some negative effects, even though your calendar got really busy, right? So it's being curious, it's having grace, it's forgiving yourself and saying it doesn't matter. I'm just progressing along the journey. It's not a straight line. It can be totally like this, right? As long as you're going in a particular direction, you know, with intention and with a sense of ownership.
Wow, thank you so much. I'm writing this down for the group here. For sharing all these great insights. I know we're running out of time, so I thought I would open it up to Jim and Lynn. Did you have any closing remarks from the breakout session or any aha moments that came from your discussion in the breakout that you'd like to share?
Thanks, Susan. You know, this was so captivating that we only had one person join us, and we had a great conversation. And then about 5 minutes ago, it was like, all right, let's see if it's still going on. And I'm thrilled that it's still going on. So, I mean, my final comments for those that are still with us is thank you. You know, thanks for joining today. Thanks for being a part of Academy Women. You know, I really love this organization, and obviously you guys do as well. And so thanks for being here.
Yeah, and I would just, you know, piggyback on that and thank Jan so much for just
Absolutely,
really sharing your story with everyone. And sound like you actually gave some more. And I wish I was there, but Jenny needed us. I'm glad, Jenny, if you're back on, she was great. But thank you for your time, Jan.
Yeah, it's my pleasure. Thank you so much for creating a safe, beautiful space to have this kind of conversation.
Thank you. Well, on that note, I think you leave us all inspired, and I wish everybody well and a great upcoming Thanksgiving break. And hopefully we'll see you all again soon.
Thank you again.
Have a great day.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.